Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is June 22nd. On this day in 1954, a woman was brutally murdered in a quiet Christchurch, New Zealand park by two teenage girls, one of whom was her own daughter. It was a crime that was so shocking, so bizarre, that it captivated and horrified not just New Zealand, but the entire English-speaking world. Today, we're revisiting the Parker-Hulme case, a chilling story of obsession, fantasy, and a friendship that spiraled into violence. Let's get started. Pauline Parker was born in Christchurch in 1938 to a working-class family. Her father worked at a local fish shop, and her mother, Honora Parker, stayed home to take care of the family. Pauline was a bright child, but her early life was difficult. She battled a serious bone infection called osteomyelitis, which left her with a painful limp and long hospital stays that isolated her from other children. In 1952, Pauline met Juliet Hulme, a girl her own age who had just moved to New Zealand from England. Juliet's father, Dr. Henry Hulme, was the rector of the University of Canterbury. Juliet also struggled with her health. She had tuberculosis and spent long stretches convalescing, often alone. That shared isolation experience seemed to form the basis of their friendship. Both girls were imaginative, bright, and emotionally intense. Their bond was immediate and deep. They didn't just share secrets, they created entire worlds. One such world was Barovnia, a fantasy realm complete with noble families and epic dramas. They wrote stories, acted out plays, and filled journals with elaborate tales of their imaginary kingdom. But as their world grew more vivid, it also grew darker. The stories turned violent and erotic, and the line between imagination and reality began to blur. Their relationship began to become a source of concern. Teachers and parents noticed their intense closeness and wondered if it had crossed the line into something more than friendship. Now remember, in 1954, homosexuality was both a crime and considered to be a mental illness in New Zealand. And while it's still debated what the nature of their relationship truly was, what's clear is this: the girls were determined to never be separated. But unfortunately, Juliet's parents had other plans. Concerned about their daughter's emotional state and her attachment to Pauline, they decided to send Juliet to South Africa to live with family members. The girls were absolutely devastated, and so they began to plan. In the weeks before the murder, Pauline's diary took on a disturbing tone. The entries were intense and increasingly sinister. Just 3 days before the killing, she wrote, quote, "We are both stark staring mad. It is wonderful to be mad," end quote. On the morning of June 22nd, 1954, Pauline and Juliet invited Pauline's mother, Honora, on a walk through Victoria Park. It was a peaceful wooded area overlooking Christchurch. Juliet carried a decorative pink stone in her handbag, while Pauline carried a brick wrapped in a stocking. As they walked along a remote path, Juliet dropped the stone on purpose. When Honora bent down to retrieve it, the girls struck. The attack was brutal. They bludgeoned Honora more than 20 times, primarily in the head and the face. She died at the scene. Covered in blood and visibly shaken, the girls ran back to the tea room at the entrance of the park, claiming that something terrible had happened. But when the police arrived, the truth became clear very quickly. The girls initially claimed that Honora had fallen, but her injuries were clearly too severe to have been the result of a fall. Then, the murder weapon, the brick in the stocking, was found nearby, and both girls were taken into custody that same day. Once in police custody, the girls' story unraveled almost immediately. The crime scene painted a clear picture of what happened. But then came the discovery that sealed their fate: Pauline's diary. Investigators read with growing horror as they turned the pages. The entries didn't just describe fantasy lands, they documented the planning of the murder. One entry from the day before the attack said, quote, "We decided to use a brick in a stocking rather than a sandbag. We discussed the moider fully. That strange spelling, moider, M-O-I-D-E-R, borrowed from gangster slang, just showed how far the girls had slipped into their imaginary universe." The diary left no doubt this crime was premeditated. And the motive? In their eyes, Pauline's mother was the only thing standing between them and their imagined future together. So, they removed her. The trial, which began in August 1954, was an international sensation. Newspapers from around the world ran headlines about killer schoolgirls and their murderous friendship. Inside the courtroom, the mood was electric. The prosecution argued that the girls were calculating, that they had lured Honora to the park with the express purpose of killing her. The defense countered with a theory of shared psychosis, or folie à deux, a rare condition where two people share the same delusional beliefs, but never would have committed a crime on their own. Psychiatrists confirmed that the girls were immersed in a fantasy world, but ultimately, both were found to be legally sane. The jury deliberated for just a few hours before coming back with a guilty verdict. Because they were underage, the girls avoided the death penalty. Instead, they were sentenced to indefinite detention, quote, "at Her Majesty's pleasure." Pauline and Juliet were separated immediately and served 5 years at different institutions. When they were both released in 1959, they were given new identities and forbidden to ever contact one another again. Juliet Hulme reinvented herself as Anne Perry and moved to the UK, where she became a celebrated writer of historical detective fiction. It wasn't until the 1990s that her past came to light, which prompted her to publicly admit her role in the murder and express remorse. She passed away in 2023. Pauline Parker took on the name Hilary Nathan and lived a quiet life in rural England, reportedly devoting herself to a religious life and keeping a low profile. She has never spoken publicly about the case. The story of the Parker-Hulme murder continues to fascinate. In 1994, filmmaker Peter Jackson brought it to the screen in Heavenly Creatures, the groundbreaking movie that launched not only his career, but the careers of Kate Winslet and Melanie Lynskey. The film offered a stylized but deeply emotional portrayal of the girls' relationship, which drew renewed interest in the case. Even today, the murder raises unsettling questions. How could two smart, privileged teenagers commit such a horrific act? Was it love, madness, a shared delusion, or some combination of all three? What we know for certain is this. On a winter day in 1954, fantasy turned fatal. And the consequences rippled far beyond that park in Christchurch. On June 22, 1954, a murder shattered the quiet calm of post-war New Zealand. It was a killing that was not born of rage or greed, but of obsession, imagination, and a friendship that was too intense to survive the real world. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!